Right. So today we're going deep on something pretty different, I think.
Okay.
Ethical non-monogamy,
Yeah.
or as you might have heard it called, ethical slutting.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, even just reading the excerpts from Ethical Slut by Dossie, Easton, and Janet W. Hardy that you sent over, it's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So
I think you'll find it's a fascinating deep dive for sure.
let's break it down.
Okay.
What does this lifestyle actually mean?
Well, the interesting thing is right away,
Yeah.
this book is challenging a lot of assumptions that we make without even realizing it.
Okay.
Like when we hear serious relationship,
Yeah.
we immediately think living together.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Right.
It's like the next step.
It is. That's what we're taught.
Yeah.
But this book has all these couples who are together, long-term committed,
Mm-hmm.
but live in separate places.
Wait, living apart together?
Yeah.
How does that even work?
It really does kind of mess with our idea of how a relationship is supposed to go.
Right.
Like you said, moving in is like the next logical step.
Yeah.
But for these couples, it's not about sharing an address. It's more about
Yeah.
the emotional connection and the life that they build together,
Nice.
even if they have their own separate houses.
Interesting.
They actually give an example from Dossie Easton's own life.
Oh, okay.
She was dating a guy named Patrick,
Mm-hmm.
but Patrick lived with his primary partner, Louisa,
Okay.
and Dossie and Louisa ended up becoming close friends.
Hold on. So Dossie's dating Patrick,
Yeah.
who lives with Louisa,
Yep.
and they all become friends.
Yeah.
That's not the love triangle we usually hear about.
Exactly. And that's exactly the point.
Okay.
The book's saying that meeting your partner's other partners can really change the dynamic.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of goes against
Yeah.
that whole other woman stereotype, doesn't it?
Right.
In fact, Louisa and Dossie ended up becoming best friends
Yeah.
and even went into business together.
Best friends and business partners.
Yeah.
That's like next level.
It is.
So does this mean that like everyone in ethical non-monogamy is expected to be friends with everybody?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
The book's not about having all these strict rules.
Right.
It's more about open communication and respecting everyone's boundaries.
Okay.
So meeting your partner's other partners isn't like a requirement.
Yeah.
But like we saw with Dossie's story, sometimes those connections can become something really positive and unexpected.
I mean, that's a pretty amazing outcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is already making me rethink a lot about relationships, but get ready for this.
Okay.
The book also introduces this idea of having multiple primary partners.
Yes.
Not just like one primary and then other relationships,
Right.
but multiple people who all have that primary status.
That's where things get really interesting
Yeah.
because it challenges the whole idea of one true love.
Mm-hmm.
Like there can only be one most important person in your life.
Yeah.
But the book argues that love doesn't have to be limited like that.
Okay.
You can have deep, loving connections with more than one person.
So it's like love is not a finite resource.
Exactly.
Interesting.
They actually share a story about a couple, Robert and Celia,
Mm-hmm.
who've had multiple primary relationships for decades.
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 Wow.
They raised kids together and built this incredible chosen family network.
So you're saying that it can be a long-term thing,
It absolutely can be.
not just a phase.
Right. It shows you can build a whole life and even a community around this model.
That's incredible. And you know what else is interesting?
What's that?
The book doesn't assume that everyone wants to be part of a couple,
Right.
even a multi-person one.
Yeah.
They talk about people who are intentionally single.
Yeah, that was really refreshing to read about, wasn't it?
It was, because I feel like so often being single is portrayed as just this waiting period until you find the one.
Exactly. Like it's not a choice. It's just
Yeah.
something you have to endure.
Right.
But the book talks about intentionally single people creating fulfilling lives
Mhm.
in all kinds of relationships, you know?
Yeah, friends, lovers.
Exactly. Without the pressure of needing a partner.
It's like defining what fulfillment looks like on your own terms.
That's it.
And they give this example of a woman who built her own house.
Yeah.
And just loves her freedom
Mm-hmm.
while still having strong connections with other people.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you.
So even within these alternative relationship models, the book acknowledges that things change.
Absolutely.
Relationships evolve, sometimes they end.
It's true. They don't shy away from that reality,
Yeah.
but they encourage a more compassionate approach to breakups.
Okay.
Like Dossie actually stayed friends with her ex-husband,
Really?
Finn, even 20 years after their divorce.
20 years.
20 years.
Wow. Okay. So it's not always about cutting ties completely.
It makes you wonder if we've made ending things more dramatic than they need to be.
Yeah.
What if there are other ways to move forward?
Interesting.
And Dossie also maintained a friendship and a sexual relationship with another ex,
Okay.
Bill,
Wow.
even after their romantic relationship ended.
So even within this idea of breaking up, there's this fluidity,
Yes.
this potential for something new to emerge.
That seems to be a key theme here. Fluidity and redefining what we think we know about relationships.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of redefining things, the book gets into this fascinating discussion about sex itself.
Oh, yeah. This is where things got really interesting.
Right.
They challenged that super limited, goal-oriented view of sex that we're all taught.
It's like we're told that sex is only about intercourse
Right.
and reaching orgasm.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't fit into that tiny little box, it's somehow not real sex.
Exactly.
But they blow that whole idea wide open.
Yeah.
They argue that any experience that brings pleasure and connection can be considered sexual.
Okay.
It could be a deep conversation, a shared touch,
Wow.
a moment of intense eye contact.
Oh.
It's about expanding our understanding of what can be sexual and letting go of those limited definitions we're so used to.
It's like they're saying sex is part of everything and everything is part of sex.
Yeah.
Which is pretty profound when you think about it.
It is.
And they have this story about a sex worker who had a profoundly sexual experience just talking with a client.
Wow.
It wasn't physical at all,
Right.
but the emotional and energetic connection was so intense
Interesting.
that it felt deeply erotic.
It really shows that sex isn't just a physical act. It's about energy, connection, and intimacy on multiple levels.
Okay, so even with this broader definition, the book acknowledges that we face obstacles when it comes to good sex.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be real to say that it's always easy and perfect.
Right.
So,
What are some of the things that get in the way?
well, they talk about things like all those negative cultural messages, the pressure of body image ideals,
Yeah.
and even just the misinformation that's out there about sex.
Right.
It's no wonder that so many people struggle with shame and anxiety.
It's like we're always being told that our bodies are wrong,
Exactly.
that our desires are wrong, that we should be ashamed of our sexuality.
It can be really hard to explore your own sexuality when you're carrying all of that baggage around.
Yeah, and you know what they said about those negative cultural messages really got to me.
Yeah,
It's true. We all internalize that stuff,
we do.
even if we don't realize it.
Absolutely.
And on top of all that, they also talk about communication as a major obstacle.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, even with partners, it can be so hard to talk openly and honestly about sex.
It can be easier to just avoid the conversation,
Right.
but that can actually lead to bigger problems.
Yeah, if you can't even talk about it, how are you supposed to work through issues?
Exactly.
Explore what you want.
Right.
Create those really fulfilling experiences.
They make a good point. Communication is key.
It is. But the good news is that the book doesn't just point out the problems.
That's right.
They offer actual advice, exercises to try to help you overcome these obstacles.
And they really emphasize this idea
Yeah.
that good sex is a skill.
Like anything else, you can learn and improve with practice. Okay, I love that.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
You know, instead of feeling like you're either good or bad at sex,
Right.
it becomes about exploration and growth.
Yeah.
Figuring out what works for you and your partners.
I like that a lot. And speaking of exploration, the book really dives into the importance of masturbation,
Yes.
which I think is so great that they address it.
I know, it's still such a taboo topic.
It is.
But it's something that most people do. And they frame masturbation as a way to really get to know your own body, your own desires.
Yeah.
What turns you on?
Like becoming your own best lover.
Exactly.
So to speak.
Exactly. And then once you have that knowledge, it becomes so much easier to communicate those needs and desires to your partner.
That makes a lot of sense. And they also encourage exploring sex toys,
Oh, yeah.
which, let's be honest, can open up a whole new world.
They really can.
Yeah.
There's so much out there.
And it's not about feeling like you need toys to have good sex,
Right.
but they can definitely add something new.
Absolutely.
It's all about what works for you.
Exactly. And what you're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about finding what you enjoy.
Yeah, so it sounds like ethical slutting is really about taking ownership of your own pleasure and your own sexuality.
It really is.
Okay, so speaking of pleasure, the book also talks about the importance of creating the right environment.
Right.
Remember that whole concept of getting your conditions met?
Yes.
So it's about figuring out what you need to feel safe, comfortable, and free of worry.
So you can really relax and enjoy the experience.
Exactly. And that could be something as simple as dimming the lights, putting on music,
Yeah.
locking the door.
Right.
Or maybe it's more about feeling emotionally secure,
That's true.
like knowing that you have clear agreements about safer sex practices, or just feeling like you can be completely open with your partner.
It's about feeling good in your mind and your body.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It is.
The physical, the emotional, the mental.
All of it.
Yeah.
And all of that comes back to communication.
Right.
It's such a consistent theme throughout this book.
Like we've been saying.
Exactly.
Key.
And they offer so many great tips for overcoming those communication hurdles and really talking openly and honestly about sex.
Like the yes, no.
Mm.
Maybe exercise?
Yes.
That seems like a great place to start.
It's a really good tool.
Yeah.
And it's a structured way to have a conversation about your desires and boundaries. And it helps you get everything out in the open.
Without judgment.
Exactly.
Right.
It just feels like such a healthy way to approach communication about anything important in a relationship.
So we've been talking about intimacy and connection
Yeah.
on a one-on-one level,
Right.
but ethical slutting doesn't stop there.
It does.
The book gets into some pretty adventurous territory.
It does.
Public sex, group sex, even orgies.
Okay, but remember, this is a choice, not a requirement.
Okay.
Not everyone who practices ethical non-monogamy is interested in group sex.
Okay.
And that's perfectly fine.
So for those who are curious, tell me more.
Well, the book actually offers this framework for approaching those experiences ethically and responsibly.
Okay.
You know, they talk about different motivations that people might have.
So why would someone want to explore group sex?
Well, it could be about pushing boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
challenging norms,
Yeah.
exploring fantasies,
Okay.
even just celebrating sexuality in a more open way.
So many different reasons.
Right, and it can be really liberating.
Okay, but I have to ask, what about safety and etiquette when it comes to group sex?
You're right, that's a whole other level.
Yeah.
But the book addresses that as well.
Okay.
They really emphasize that consent, respect for boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
clear communication are essential in those environments.
Okay.
It's not just a free-for-all.
So there are rules and etiquette.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They want to make sure everyone feels safe and respected.
So it's not just about showing up and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
There's some thought that goes into it.
Definitely. They actually even suggest visiting a nude beach or hot springs as a way to prep.
Wait, going to a nude beach to prep for an orgy.
Yeah.
What's the thinking there?
It's about getting comfortable with nudity and seeing a wider range of bodies in a non-sexualized setting.
Okay.
It can help desensitize you to those unrealistic body ideals that we're all bombarded with.
Right.
And help you embrace the diversity of human forms.
Okay.
It can also be good practice for setting boundaries
Interesting.
and just feeling more comfortable in your own skin.
So it's like a stepping stone to feeling more confident and comfortable in a sexual setting.
Exactly. And there's also a lot to be learned from just observing other people in those settings.
Yeah.
They talk about how watching other people have sex can actually help you learn new techniques,
Okay.
explore different possibilities,
Interesting.
even address some of your own anxieties or insecurities.
So it's like real life sex education, but way more fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And much less clinical. And they even share a story about a woman named June who was initially really hesitant about going to a lesbian orgy, but ended up having an incredible experience.
Okay.
And even made a really meaningful connection.
Wow.
So it's a good reminder that sometimes the best things are outside of our comfort zones.
Yeah, and even with all this talk about pushing boundaries and exploring different things,
Yeah.
the book really emphasizes that everyone has their own pace and their own limits.
Absolutely.
It's not about pressure.
Right.
It's about what you're comfortable with.
It's all about personal empowerment.
Yeah.
Making choices that feel right for you.
Yeah.
And approaching those choices with awareness, responsibility, and respect.
Yeah, it seems like so much of this is about challenging those internal biases we all have,
It is.
as well as those societal expectations.
Yeah, like those boxes that society tries to put us in.
Right.
You hit the nail on the head. They
Yeah.
talk about how these group sex environments can bring up all these judgments and assumptions, you know, age, body type, gender, sexual orientation, all of it.
It sounds like it could be a real opportunity for growth,
It can.
like unlearning all that societal conditioning
Exactly.
and embracing the diversity in human desire.
You got it. And ultimately, the book encourages us to move beyond that binary thinking,
Okay.
not just in relationships, but in how we think about sex and sexuality in general.
So it's not just about couples versus singles or monogamy versus non-monogamy.
Right.
There are shades of gray in between.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into this book,
Yes, before we move into part 2.
you've already given me so much to think about.
Good.
It's amazing how just this little bit is already making me rethink so much about relationships and sexuality.
It's a powerful book for sure.
It is. So we talked about challenging those, those binary ways of thinking and really expanding our definitions of relationships and sex.
Right.
But how does all of this actually play out in real life?
Right.
The book talks about this idea of the ebb and flow of relationships, which I thought was really interesting.
It's a nice way to look at it because it challenges that whole happily ever after thing.
Right.
Like relationships are just supposed to stay the same forever. But they're saying even in non-monogamous relationships, things change.
Yeah.
Connections shift. They fade. They transform into something new.
And it's not always a bad thing.
Right. It's acknowledging that change is natural.
Yeah.
It's part of life.
It feels more honest
Yeah.
than pretending that it's all going to be perfect forever.
Absolutely. And they even talk about breakups in a more positive light.
Okay.
Like they encourage ethical and compassionate ways to navigate those transitions.
Interesting.
It's not about denying the hurt,
Right.
but it's about recognizing that endings can be opportunities for growth
Okay.
and healing.
So even when a romantic or sexual connection ends,
Yeah.
there's still potential for a different kind of relationship.
Right. Maybe it becomes a friendship, or maybe it's just a respectful understanding of what was.
It's about honoring the connection in whatever shape it takes.
Exactly. And they give this great example about Janet maintaining a close friendship with her ex-husband, even 20 years after their divorce.
20 years?
3 years.
That's impressive.
And remember, Dossie stayed connected with her ex, Bill.
Yeah.
Even after their romantic relationship ended.
Right.
They stayed friends and continued to have a sexual connection.
Wow. Okay, so it's not always about cutting ties completely.
Right. It challenges that whole idea that a breakup has to be this dramatic all-or-nothing event.
It's less like an ending and more like a transformation.
It's a beautiful example of how we can redefine what ending even means in the context of relationships.
So relationships can be these multi-layered things moving through different phases and forms without completely disappearing.
Exactly.
I love that.
It feels more aligned with the reality of human connection.
Okay, so speaking of fluidity, the book goes into this really interesting exploration of sex itself.
Oh, yes.
This is where things got really interesting for me.
Right.
They really push back against that limited, goal-oriented view of sex that we're all taught.
It's like we're told that sex is only real if it involves intercourse and leads to orgasm.
And if it doesn't fit that definition, then it's somehow less valid.
Exactly. But they challenge that completely.
Yeah.
They argue that sex can be any kind of intimate, sensual experience that brings pleasure and connection.
So it could be like a deep conversation, a shared touch, even just a look.
Exactly. It's about expanding our understanding of what can be considered sexual and letting go of those rigid definitions.
Remember that phrase they use?
Oh, yeah.
Sex is part of everything, and everything is part of sex.
That's a good one.
It is.
So true.
It's like they're saying that sensuality and eroticism can be woven into so many parts of our lives.
Right, if we're open to it.
Yeah, and they have this great story about a sex worker who had this profoundly sexual experience just talking with a client.
It wasn't physical at all.
But the emotional and energetic connection was so intense that it felt erotic.
It really highlights that sex is about more than just the physical.
Right. It's about energy, connection, intimacy.
Not those things.
Okay, so even with this expanded definition, the book acknowledges that there are obstacles when it comes to good sex.
Of course.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be realistic to say that it's always easy.
Right. So what are some of the things that get in the way?
Well, they talk about those negative cultural messages, the pressure of body image ideals, and even just misinformation about sex.
It's like we're always being told that our bodies are wrong, our desires are wrong, that we should be ashamed.
It's hard to explore your sexuality when you're carrying all that baggage.
Yeah, and they also talk about communication.
Oh, yeah.
As a major obstacle.
For sure.
Even with partners.
Right.
It can be so hard to talk about sex.
It's easier to just avoid it.
Right.
But avoiding those conversations can lead to problems.
Yeah, if you can't talk about it, how are you supposed to address issues?
Exactly.
Or explore what you want?
Or create those fulfilling experiences.
Right.
Communication is key.
It is. And the book offers advice and exercises.
They do.
To help overcome these obstacles.
That's right.
They emphasize that good sex is a skill.
Like anything else.
That you can learn and improve.
With practice.
Okay, I love that.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
instead of good or bad.
Yeah.
It's about exploration and growth.
And they talk about masturbation.
Oh, yes.
It's so great they address that.
It's still such a taboo topic.
It is, even though most people do it,
Right.
they frame it as a way to get to know your body, your desires,
Yeah.
what turns you on.
Becoming your own best lover,
Right.
so to speak.
And then you can communicate those needs and desires to your partner,
Exactly.
which makes so much sense.
It does.
You can't expect to have amazing sex with someone else if you don't even know what feels good for you.
Right. And they even suggest trying things out
Oh.
during masturbation that you might be curious about.
Okay.
Experimenting with different sensations, fantasies.
Like a safe space to explore.
Exact.
And then bring that knowledge and confidence into your partnered sex.
It's like doing your homework.
Right.
And they also encourage exploring sex toys.
Oh, yeah.
Which can be a game changer.
I know.
There's a whole world out there.
Yeah, it's not that you need toys to have good sex.
But they can definitely add something new.
Right. And it's about what works for you and your partner.
And what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and your comfort levels.
Absolutely.
It's all about finding what you enjoy.
Exactly.
So ethical slutting is about taking ownership of your pleasure and your sexuality.
And creating the right environment for yourself.
Remember that concept of getting your conditions met?
Yes.
So it's about figuring out what you need to feel safe, comfortable, worry-free.
So you can relax and enjoy.
Exactly. And that could be as simple as locking the door, dimming the lights.
Putting on some music.
Or maybe it's more about feeling emotionally secure.
It could be.
Like knowing that you have those agreements about safer sex, or feeling like you could be open with your partner.
It's about feeling good in your mind and your body.
It's all connected.
It is.
The physical, emotional, mental,
Cultivate.
and all of that brings us back to communication.
Back to communication.
Which has been the theme throughout this book.
It really has.
And they have so many tips for getting over those communication hurdles.
They do.
And talking openly, honestly about sex.
Like that, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe exercise.
Yeah.
It's a great place to start.
It is. It feels like such a healthy way to approach communication.
It does.
Not just about sex, but about anything that's important in a relationship.
Exactly.
So we've been talking about intimacy and connection on this one-on-one level.
Right.
But ethical sledding doesn't stop there.
It goes beyond that.
The book delves into public sex, group sex orgies.
It does get a little wild, but remember, this is a choice.
Okay.
Not everyone who practices ethical non-monogamy is interested in group sex.
Okay.
And that's totally fine.
So for those who are curious, tell me more.
Well, they offer a framework for approaching those experiences ethically and responsibly. They talk about the different motivations.
So why would someone want to explore group sex?
It could be about pushing boundaries, challenging societal norms, exploring fantasies, celebrating their sexuality in a more open and communal way.
It sounds like it could be really liberating.
It can be, but it's important to remember that there are challenges, considerations.
Oh, what about safety and etiquette?
Well, they address that directly.
Okay.
They emphasize that consent, respect for boundaries, clear communication are essential.
So it's not just a free-for-all.
It's not. There are rules and etiquette.
Okay, to make sure that everyone feels safe.
Exactly.
So it's not just showing up and hoping for the best.
There's some thought and preparation that goes into it.
Okay.
They even suggest visiting a nude beach or hot springs.
We're going to a nude beach to prep for an orgy.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's about getting comfortable with nudity.
Okay.
Seeing a wider range of bodies in a non-sexualized setting.
Okay.
It helps desensitize you to those unrealistic body ideals. Embrace the diversity of human forms.
Yeah.
Good practice for setting boundaries.
Interesting.
Feeling more comfortable in your own skin.
So it's like a stepping stone.
It is.
To feeling more confident in a more sexual setting.
Exactly. And there's also a lot to be learned from observing.
Yeah.
They talk about how watching other people have sex can actually help you learn new techniques. Explore possibilities. Address your own anxieties or insecurities.
So it's like real-life sex ed.
But way more.
But more realistic.
And relatable.
And they share a story about a woman named June who was hesitant about going to a lesbian orgy, but ended up having an incredible experience.
And even made a connection.
Wow.
It just goes to show that sometimes those rewarding experiences are outside of our comfort zones.
But even with all this talk about pushing boundaries, the book emphasizes that everyone has their own pace and limits.
Absolutely.
It's not about pressure.
It's about making choices that feel right for you.
Yeah.
Approaching those choices responsibly.
So ethical sledding is all about personal empowerment
It is.
and challenging those societal expectations.
Challenging those expectations about what a real relationship is.
Right. We're taught that love and commitment can only exist in a monogamous relationship.
It's like we've been handed a script,
Yeah.
and we're just supposed to follow it.
But ethical slutting throws that out the window.
It shows us that there's so many other ways
Yeah.
to experience love, commitment, connection.
It includes people who are intentionally single.
Absolutely.
It's not always about finding the one.
Or building a life with a partner.
There's no one size fits all.
Exactly what matters is finding what works for you.
Yeah. Creating relationships that feel authentic and fulfilling.
Whether that's with one person, multiple people,
Or no one at all.
or no one at all.
And that can change over time.
Exactly.
I love how they talk about maintaining connections with exes.
It challenges those assumptions about what it means to end a relationship.
Like Dossie and her ex-husband.
Yeah.
They stayed friends for years.
It's a reminder that things can evolve,
Yeah.
transform without disappearing.
It's about honoring that connection,
It is.
whatever form it takes.
Ultimately, I think that's what ethical slutting is all about.
Yeah.
Embracing the full spectrum of human connection.
Creating a more loving and liberated world.
It's about challenging those limiting beliefs.
About relationships, sex, love.
And creating a world where everyone feels free to be themselves.
So as we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive,
As we get ready to move into our final thoughts.
it's amazing how much this book has made me rethink.
It's a powerful book.
It is. I have to say, this whole conversation's been so eye-opening. Like, I'm seeing relationships and sexuality in a whole new light.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is. And, one thing that keeps coming up is this emphasis on communication.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like that's really the foundation for building any healthy relationship, no matter what form it takes.
You're right. The book really stresses that conscious communication is so important, especially in non-monogamous relationships.
Yeah.
It's not about just doing whatever you feel like. It's about respecting each other.
Yeah.
Being honest about your needs, your desires.
And your fears.
Your fears, exactly.
Yep.
And making sure everyone feels heard and valued.
Like they say in the book, you got to own your own stew.
That's a good one.
It is, right?
Taking responsibility.
Yeah. For your own emotions and actions.
Not blaming other people.
And they give us some really good tools for having those puffer conversations, like the yes, no, maybe exercise.
Right.
That's got to be helpful.
It creates a structure for talking about your desires and boundaries.
Without judgment.
Exactly.
And they talk about dealing with jealousy too,
Oh, yeah.
which I imagine comes up a lot.
It does. We're all human.
We are.
But they don't say you should ignore it. They encourage you to approach it with curiosity, with compassion.
So asking yourself, what's at the root of this?
Yeah. What need isn't being met?
What fear is being triggered?
Exactly. And then you can talk about it with your partner.
Yeah.
Honestly, and work together to find solutions.
It's not about pretending jealousy doesn't exist,
Right.
but learning to deal with it in a healthy way.
Exactly. And I think what's so valuable about this book is how it challenges all those expectations
Yeah.
about what a real relationship is supposed to look like.
We're told love and commitment can only exist in a monogamous relationship.
It's like we've been handed this script and we're not allowed to deviate.
But ethical slutting says no.
There are other ways to have
Yeah.
love, commitment, connection.
And they talk about folks who are intentionally single too.
Absolutely.
Not everyone wants a primary partner.
Some people find fulfillment through a network of friends, lovers.
Yeah, chosen family.
Exactly. There's no one size fits all.
It's about what works for you.
And that can change over time.
Yeah, I love how they talk about staying connected with exes.
It's a really interesting concept.
It is.
It challenges that idea of ending a relationship.
Like Dossie and her ex-husband.
Right, they stayed close.
For years.
It shows that things can change without everything disappearing.
It's about honoring the connection no matter what.
And I think that's what ethical slutting is really all about.
Yeah.
Embracing the full spectrum of human connection.
Creating a more loving and liberated world.
Challenging those beliefs.
About relationships, sex, love.
Yeah, creating a world where we can all be ourselves.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Ethical Slut, I'm feeling like a whole new world has opened up.
Me too. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that ethical slutting is about so much more than just sex.
Absolutely.
It's about empowerment communication, creating a world where all forms of love and connection are celebrated.
It's about embracing the full human experience.
In all its messy glory.
Exactly.
So to everyone listening, as you go on your own journey, I want you to ask yourself this. What if true sexual liberation isn't about rules, but about creating a world where all forms of love are honored?
where we can all be our authentic selves.
Without shame or judgment.
Exactly.
That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Ethical Slut.
Yeah, check out the book and see what you think.
Happy exploring.